Behind the electric facade of Dakota City's teenage superhero lies a treasure trove of jaw-dropping secrets. From deliberately sabotaged toy lines and hidden gay characters to NBA players becoming superheroes, and a voice actor talking to himself in crossover episodes. Static Shock wasn't just groundbreaking for featuring the first black superhero lead in broadcast animation, it was also hiding some of the weirdest production stories, censorship battles, and behind-the-scenes drama you've never heard of. Fact 1. The show was deliberately killed by toy companies. Static Shock met one of the most heartbreaking ends in television history, and it had absolutely nothing to do with ratings or viewer interest. The show was actually performing incredibly well, ranking as the second highest-rated Saturday morning program among all networks, with only the global phenomenon Pokémon managing to beat it in the ratings game. Kids loved watching Virgil Hawkins zip around Dakota City on his metal disc, fighting crime and dealing with the everyday struggles of being a teenager, and the numbers proved it week after week. But behind the scenes, a much darker story was unfolding that would ultimately doom the groundbreaking series. American animation costs significantly more money to produce than networks can recover just from licensing fees alone, which means animated shows need additional revenue streams like toy sales, clothing lines, and other merchandise to actually turn a profit. This is where Static Shock hit an insurmountable wall that had nothing to do with the quality of the show or the dedication of its fans. Series creator Dwayne McDuffie later revealed the devastating truth in interviews, explaining that despite the show's massive popularity and critical acclaim, Static Shock was completely unable to attract toy companies or other merchandise licensors who could provide those crucial additional revenue streams. The problem wasn't that the show lacked commercial appeal or that kids weren't interested in static-themed products. Instead, toy companies made a calculated business decision based on their belief that action figures and merchandise featuring black superheroes simply wouldn't sell well enough to justify production costs. This corporate prejudice created an impossible situation where a hit show with devoted fans was essentially starved of the financial support it needed to continue production. McDuffie acknowledged that, while they did manage to secure some limited merchandise deals, including a kids' meal promotion, DVD releases, and a couple of children's books, these smaller opportunities weren't nearly enough to sustain the series financially, leading to its premature cancellation after 4 seasons and 52 episodes. Fact 2. Richie was TV's first secret gay superhero. Long before the Arrowverse introduced openly LGBTQ+ characters to superhero television, Static Shock was quietly making history with a groundbreaking representation that most viewers never even realized was happening. Richie Foley, Virgil's best friend who later became the techno-genius superhero Gear, was actually written as a gay character from the very beginning, making him DC's first confirmed gay superhero to appear on television. This revelation didn't come to light until 2005, when series creator Dwayne McDuffie confirmed in online forums that Richie had always been intended as a closeted gay teenager throughout the show's entire run. McDuffie explained that due to the strict broadcast standards and censorship regulations for children's television at the time, they couldn't explicitly address Richie's sexuality without risking the show's Y7 rating, which was the most adult rating a Saturday morning cartoon could receive. Instead of abandoning the character concept entirely, McDuffie and his writing team developed a clever workaround that involved subtle hints and coding that adult viewers might pick up on while keeping the content appropriate for younger audiences. McDuffie described his approach by saying that he wrote Richie as aggressively and unconvincingly announcing his heterosexuality whenever possible, with lines like, "Wow, look at those girls in swimsuits. I sure like girls." While Virgil would roll his eyes at how transparent and awkward these declarations sounded, the character was actually based on Rick Stone from the original Static comics, who had been openly gay in the source material and had even gone through a coming-out storyline during the comics run. By adapting this character for television but having to hide his sexuality due to network restrictions, the show's creators were essentially creating a closeted version of an already established gay character, adding layers of complexity to Richie's personality that many fans didn't fully understand until McDuffie's later confirmation brought this hidden aspect of the character into the open. Fact 3. Phil LaMarr literally talked to himself in crossovers. Voice acting veteran Phil LaMarr found himself in one of the most unusual situations in animated television history, when Static Shock began crossing over with other DC Animated Universe shows because he was simultaneously voicing two major superheroes who would eventually meet and have conversations with each other. LaMarr had already established himself as the voice of John Stewart, the Green Lantern, on the Justice League animated series when he was also cast as Virgil Hawkins, better known as Static, creating a unique scenario where one actor was essentially having conversations with himself during crossover episodes. This bizarre vocal arrangement became most apparent during the two-part Static Shock episode called A League of Their Own, where Static and Gear are called to help the Justice League when the Watchtower space station loses power and threatens to crash into Earth. Throughout these episodes, LaMarr had to seamlessly switch between his Static voice and his Green Lantern voice during scenes where the two characters interact, requiring him to literally record both sides of conversations between his own characters. The situation became even more complex when Static later appeared in Justice League Unlimited episodes, including The Once and Future Thing Part 2, Time Warped, where an older version of Static appears alongside John Stewart in future timeline scenes. LaMarr has described this experience as pulling double superhero duty within the DC Animated Universe, and he's mentioned in interviews that this dual role made him feel like Static Shock was truly legitimized, as part of the larger DC animated legacy that he had grown up watching and reading. What makes this vocal juggling act even more impressive is that LaMarr had to maintain distinct personality traits and speech patterns for both characters while recording their interactions, ensuring that viewers could easily distinguish between the confident, experienced Green Lantern and the enthusiastic, sometimes overwhelmed teenage Static, even though both voices were coming from the same person sitting in the same recording booth. Fact 4. Teen Titans crossover was scrapped for bizarre timing. One of the most significant crossover episodes in Static Shock's history almost never happened the way fans remember it, because the original plan involved a completely different team of superheroes that would have changed the entire trajectory of the DC Animated Universe. Series creator Dwayne McDuffie revealed that Static was initially supposed to team up with the Teen Titans in what would have been a major two-part crossover event, but a scheduling nightmare at Warner Brothers forced the production team to completely scrap those plans and pivot to the Justice League instead. The problem arose because of the way television production schedules work across different networks and programming blocks, creating a timing conflict that nobody had anticipated during the early planning stages. The proposed Static Shock and Teen Titans crossover episodes were scheduled to air before the very first episode of the Teen Titans animated series had even premiered on Cartoon Network, which would have meant that audiences would be introduced to Robin, Starfire, Raven, Beast Boy, and Cyborg through Static Shock rather than through their own show. Warner Brothers executives realized this would create massive confusion among viewers, especially younger audiences who might not understand why these characters were appearing on Static Shock when they had never seen them before in their own series. The network was also concerned about potential marketing conflicts and the possibility of audiences getting mixed messages about which show these characters actually belong to, since introducing major characters through a crossover before their own series launches could dilute the impact of the Teen Titans premiere. When someone at the WB network suggested using the Justice League instead for the crossover episodes, the writers quickly adapted their scripts to feature Batman, Green Lantern, The Flash, Hawkgirl, and Martian Manhunter rather than the teenage superhero team. Interestingly, this last-minute change maintained the same basic structure as the original Teen Titans plan, since both teams consisted of exactly 5 core members, making the script adjustments relatively straightforward despite the completely different characters and dynamics involved. Fact 5. Only one NBA player voiced himself in Hoop Squad. The 4th season episode, titled Hoop Squad, stands out as one of Static Shock's most ambitious celebrity crossover attempts, transforming 4 real NBA superstars into a secret superhero team that teams up with Static and Gear to save Los Angeles from a giant robot threat. The episode featured Karl Malone, Yao Ming, Tracy McGrady, and Steve Nash as members of the Hoop Squad, each equipped with high-tech bioenhancer suits that gave them superhero abilities like Point Man, Center Force, Spin Drive, and Pulverizer. But the behind-the-scenes reality of getting these basketball legends involved was much more complicated than it appeared on screen. Despite the episode's premise being built around these 4 specific NBA players appearing as themselves in animated form, only Karl Malone actually provided his own voice for his character throughout the entire episode. The other 3 basketball stars, Yao Ming, Tracy McGrady, and Steve Nash, were all voiced by professional voice actors who had to impersonate the players' speech patterns and personalities while their animated likenesses appeared on screen. This created an interesting situation where viewers were watching what appeared to be all 4 NBA players in action, but were actually hearing a mix of authentic and imitated performances that most audiences probably never noticed during the original broadcast. The production team had to work closely with voice directors to ensure that the substitute actors could capture the essence of each player's personality and speaking style, even though 3/4 of the supposed celebrity voices were actually coming from the show's regular voice acting pool. Karl Malone's direct involvement extended beyond just voice work, as he reportedly visited the animation studio during production and even signed autographs for the crew members, making his participation in the episode much more hands-on than his fellow NBA colleagues. The episode was set during the 2004 NBA All-Star Game in Los Angeles, though interestingly, only Yao Ming and Tracy McGrady were actually selected as All-Stars that year in real life. Fact 6. The show's title was technically wrong. For 4 seasons and 52 episodes, millions of viewers tuned in to watch a show called Static Shock, but the superhero they were actually following was never called by that name even once throughout the entire series. The main character consistently referred to himself and was known by everyone else simply as Static, creating a peculiar disconnect between what the show was called and what the character was actually named within the story itself. This naming confusion stems from the difference between the original source material and how it was adapted for television, revealing how marketing decisions can sometimes override creative consistency. The original Milestone comic series that inspired the animated show was straightforwardly titled Static, which ran for 46 issues from 1993 to 1997 and featured the same electromagnetic-powered teenager fighting crime in Dakota City. When Warner Brothers Animation decided to adapt the comic for television, they made the decision to add shock to the title, transforming it from Static to Static Shock, for reasons that were primarily related to marketing and brand recognition. The word shock was likely added to make the title more dynamic and action-oriented for television audiences, suggesting both the character's electrical powers and the exciting nature of the show, while also helping to distinguish the animated series from the original comic book property. What makes this title change particularly interesting is that it created a situation where the show's name didn't actually match the character's superhero identity, something that's relatively uncommon in superhero media, where titles usually correspond directly to the main character's name. Throughout the series, characters consistently call the hero Static, never Static Shock, making the show's title feel like an external label rather than something that emerged organically from the story itself. Fact 7. Dwayne McDuffie. Series creator Dwayne McDuffie made no effort to hide his complete disdain for one of Static Shock's most memorable episodes, delivering what might be one of the harshest critiques ever given by a creator about their own work. When asked about the 4th season episode Hoop Squad, which featured NBA stars Karl Malone, Yao Ming, Tracy McGrady, and Steve Nash as superheroes, McDuffie didn't mince words in describing his feelings about the finished product, calling it a train wreck. Actually more like a head-on collision of 2 trains full of stink bombs. This brutally honest assessment becomes even more significant when you understand that McDuffie and his creative team were essentially forced to produce this episode against their better judgment by Warner Brothers network executives who wanted to capitalize on celebrity crossover appeal. The creative team had serious reservations about the concept from the very beginning, feeling that shoehorning real NBA players into the Static Shock universe would compromise the show's storytelling integrity and feel forced rather than organic to the series' established tone and style. Despite their initial reluctance, the writers were required to move forward with the network's vision, leading to an episode that felt disconnected from the rest of the series and relied heavily on the novelty of celebrity appearances rather than the character development and social themes that had made Static Shock critically acclaimed. McDuffie's harsh criticism reflects the frustration that many creators feel when network interference forces them to prioritize marketing considerations over creative vision, resulting in episodes that feel more like promotional stunts than genuine storytelling. The production team did find some silver linings during the actual creation process, particularly enjoying their interactions with Karl Malone, who visited the studio and signed autographs for the crew members. However, this positive behind-the-scenes experience wasn't enough to overcome McDuffie's fundamental objections to the episode's concept and execution, leading to his memorably scathing assessment that has become legendary among fans and animation industry professionals. Fact 8. Black Vulcan costume Easter egg, hidden in plain sight. Static Shock's pilot episode contained one of the most cleverly hidden meta-jokes in animated television history, and it was sitting right there on screen for anyone familiar with classic superhero cartoons to spot. During the memorable costume-trying montage where Virgil experiments with different superhero outfits in Richie's closet, one of the rejected costumes bore a striking resemblance to Black Vulcan, the electricity-powered African-American superhero from the 1970s Super Friends animated series, who was created as a replacement for Black Lightning due to licensing disputes. This visual reference becomes exponentially more amusing when you realize that Phil Lamar, the voice actor who brought Virgil Hawkins to life, was simultaneously voicing Black Vulcan on the Adult Swim comedy series Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law, where the character appeared as a recurring figure in the show's parody of classic Hanna-Barbera superheroes. The costume Easter egg essentially created a situation where Lamar's character was rejecting an outfit that belonged to another character he was voicing at the exact same time, making it a multi-layered inside joke that connected Static Shock to both classic superhero animation and contemporary comedy programming. In the pilot episode, Virgil dismisses the Black Vulcan-inspired costume by saying it looks like a battery commercial, which adds another layer of humor since both Black Vulcan and Static share electricity-based superpowers, making the rejection feel like one electrical hero commenting on the fashion choices of another. The reference was subtle enough that younger viewers would simply see it as one of many costume options that didn't work for Static's final look, while adult animation fans and industry insiders could appreciate the clever nod to superhero television history. This kind of visual Easter egg demonstrates how the Static Shock creative team enjoyed weaving references to the broader superhero genre into their show, connecting their groundbreaking series to the long tradition of animated superhero entertainment, while simultaneously establishing their own unique identity within that legacy. Fact 9. 2 episodes aired completely out of order. Television production schedules can sometimes create confusing situations for viewers, but Static Shock experienced one of the most noticeable examples of broadcast order problems when 2 complete episodes aired an entire season later than originally intended. The episodes Consequences and Trouble Squared were both produced during the second season, but somehow didn't make it onto Kids WB's broadcast schedule until the third season had already begun, creating a jarring viewing experience that left many fans scratching their heads about apparent continuity errors. The most obvious sign that something was wrong came from the visual inconsistencies that sharp-eyed viewers immediately noticed when these episodes finally aired during Season 3. Static appeared in his original costume design throughout both episodes, featuring the blue trench coat, white shirt with the lightning bolt symbol, and distinctive goggles that he had worn during the show's first 2 seasons, rather than the updated black and streamlined look that had been introduced at the beginning of Season 3. Even more confusing was the complete absence of gear from both episodes, with Richie appearing only as Static's regular civilian friend, without any of the superhuman intelligence or technological abilities that he had developed during the second season finale and carried into the 3rd season. Additionally, Daisy Watkins appeared with her original character design and hairstyle from the earlier seasons, rather than the updated look she had received for Season 3, further confirming that these episodes were created much earlier than their broadcast date suggested. The delayed airing created a time travel effect where viewers who had been following the show's progression suddenly found themselves watching what appeared to be flashback episodes, complete with older animation styles, character designs, and relationship dynamics that no longer matched the current state of the series. This scheduling mishap provides a perfect example of how television production and broadcast timelines don't always align, sometimes resulting in episodes that feel like they've been transported from an earlier era of the show. Fact 10. Richie got powers to save his voice actor's Job. Behind one of Static Shock's most significant character developments lies a surprisingly practical production decision that had nothing to do with storytelling and everything to do with keeping a beloved voice actor employed on the series. When Richie Foley gained superhuman intelligence and technopathic abilities in the 3rd season, transforming him into the superhero gear, this major plot development was actually driven by the writers' growing difficulty in finding meaningful ways to include him in episodes as Static's adventures became more complex and action-oriented. The creative team had reached a point where Richie's role as the tech-savvy best friend who provided gadgets and moral support was becoming increasingly hard to integrate into the show's evolving storylines, particularly as Static began crossing over with major DC Universe characters and facing more sophisticated villains. Writers found themselves struggling to justify Richie's presence during high-stakes superhero situations where a regular teenager with no powers would realistically be more of a liability than an asset, creating a situation where one of the show's core characters was gradually being written out of his own series. Rather than simply reducing Jason Marsden's role or potentially eliminating Richie from the show entirely, the producers made a deliberate decision to preserve what they recognized as exceptional voice acting chemistry between Marsden and Phil LaMarr, who voiced Static. The production team had observed how well the 2 actors worked together during recording sessions and felt that their natural rapport was too valuable to lose, so they chose to solve the storytelling problem by giving Richie superpowers rather than finding new voice acting partnerships. This decision was further supported by positive responses from focus groups of children who enjoyed the dynamic between the 2 characters and wanted to see more of their friendship rather than less. The transformation into gear allowed Richie to remain an active participant in Static's adventures while maintaining the core relationship that had been central to the show since its beginning, demonstrating how practical production considerations can sometimes lead to significant creative developments. Fact 11. Brainiac's voice was deliberately dumbed down. One of the most jarring aspects of Brainiac's appearance in Static Shock's A League of Their Own crossover episodes was how completely different he sounded compared to his iconic portrayal in other DC animated universe shows. And this dramatic vocal change wasn't an accident or the result of different voice acting, but rather a deliberate post-production manipulation that altered Corey Burton's original performance. Burton, who had been voicing Brainiac throughout the DC animated universe with his signature cold, calculating, and intellectually menacing tone, recorded his lines for Static Shock, using the same approach he had established for the character in Superman, the animated series, and Justice League. However, during the editing process, the production team made the decision to artificially lower Burton's voice using audio processing equipment, pitching it down to the point where the veteran voice actor became virtually unrecognizable compared to his previous work as the character. The reasoning behind this unusual choice was that Static Shock's producers wanted to make Brainiac sound more traditionally evil and threatening for the show's younger target audience, believing that his usual intellectually cold demeanor might not register as sufficiently villainous for children watching Saturday morning cartoons. Burton himself was surprised by this post-production alteration and has openly stated that he felt the change was unnecessary, explaining that his assumption was that the producers wanted to make the villain more monstrous and foreboding rather than maintaining the eerie, creepy presence that had made Brainiac so memorable in other DC animated properties. The voice actor also noted that the altered script made Brainiac come across as a stereotypical hands-on-the-hips, challenging the universe type of villain, rather than the vast, cool intellect that defined the character in other appearances. This vocal manipulation resulted in what Burton described as a much more hokey performance compared to the sophisticated portrayal that fans had come to expect from Brainiac in Justice League, demonstrating how different target audiences can lead to significant changes in character presentation even when the same voice actor is involved. Fact 12. The show started outside the DCAU by accident. Static Shock's relationship with the larger DC animated universe began as a complete accident rather than any deliberate creative planning, creating one of the most unusual origin stories for how an animated series became connected to an established fictional continuity. When the show first premiered in 2000, the creators had no intention whatsoever of linking Static's adventures to the world of Batman, or any other DC animated properties that existed at the time, treating it instead as a completely standalone series set in its own independent universe. This original separation is clearly evident in the show's early episodes, where Virgil and his friends regularly reference Superman, Batman, and other DC heroes as fictional comic book characters that they read about and enjoy, just like real-world fans would. These references establish that, in Static's universe, the Justice League existed only as entertainment properties rather than actual superheroes operating in the same world, creating a clear distinction between Static Shock and the established DC animated universe continuity. The dramatic shift occurred during the second season when the decision was made to introduce Batman and Robin in the crossover episode, The Big Leagues, suddenly transforming DC heroes from fictional characters into real people living in the same universe as Static. This transition required the show to essentially retcon its own established continuity, quietly abandoning the previous references to DC characters as comic book figures, and instead embracing the idea that Static had always existed alongside Batman, Superman, and the rest of the Justice League. The integration became even more pronounced in later seasons when Static began appearing in Justice League Unlimited episodes and participating in major DC animated universe storylines, completing his transformation from an independent character to a full member of the shared animated continuity. This evolution demonstrates how creative decisions made during production can fundamentally alter a show's relationship to larger fictional universes, sometimes in ways that weren't originally planned or anticipated. Fact 13. Neil Patrick Harris played himself before his comeback. Neil Patrick Harris made a memorable guest appearance on Static Shock during a period when his career was in a very different place than most people remember him today, creating an unintentionally prophetic piece of casting that would become much more interesting in hindsight. Harris voiced the character of Kent Nelson in the episode Fallen Hero, playing a washed-up former child actor who had once been famous but was now struggling to find relevant work in Hollywood, and dealing with the challenges of transitioning from childhood stardom to adult acting roles. This guest appearance occurred several years before Harris experienced his major career resurgence with How I Met Your Mother, which premiered in 2005 and transformed him from a former child star primarily remembered for Doogie Howser MD into one of television's most beloved comedic actors. At the time of his Static Shock appearance, Harris was in a career phase that closely mirrored the character he was voicing, having achieved significant fame as a teenager in the late 1980s and early 1990s, but then experiencing the typical post-child star career lull that many young actors face when trying to establish themselves as adult performers. The irony of this casting choice becomes even more apparent when you consider that Harris was essentially playing an exaggerated version of his own professional situation, portraying a character whose biggest concern was being remembered only for his childhood work, while struggling to prove that he could handle more mature and sophisticated roles. The character's frustrations about being typecast and unable to move beyond his early fame directly paralleled the real challenges that Harris was facing in his own career during this period. This guest appearance serves as a fascinating time capsule of Harris's career trajectory, capturing him at a moment when his future success was far from guaranteed, and when the idea of him becoming a major star again through musical theater, hosting award shows, and starring in hit television comedies would have seemed unlikely to most industry observers. Fact 14. Music had to be faster than hip-hop. Static Shock's distinctive soundtrack emerged from a unique musical challenge that forced composer Richard Wolfe to essentially invent a new sound for animated television, all because traditional hip-hop music couldn't keep up with the pace that superhero action sequences demanded. Wolfe had a very specific vision for the show's action scenes, wanting to create what he described as a real adrenaline-pumping beat that would run at 125 beats per minute to match the intense energy of Static's electromagnetic battles and high-speed chases through Dakota City. The problem arose when Wolfe discovered that conventional hip-hop music, which would have been the most obvious choice for a show featuring an African-American teenage protagonist in an urban setting, typically operated at a much slower tempo of around 110 beats per minute. This 15-beat difference might not sound like much, but in terms of musical energy and the psychological impact on viewers, it represented a significant gap between the relaxed, laid-back feel of traditional hip-hop and the urgent, heart-pounding intensity that Wolfe wanted to achieve for Static's superhero adventures. Rather than compromise his vision or abandon the hip-hop influence entirely, Wolfe made the creative decision to develop a hybrid musical approach that combined the rhythmic elements and vocal stylings of hip-hop with the faster tempo and electronic instrumentation of dance and electronica music. This fusion resulted in a soundtrack that featured hip-hop-type and DMX-style vocals layered over electronic beats that could maintain the necessary 125 beats per minute pace. The musical approach varied depending on the specific scenes and emotional needs of each episode, with Wolfe incorporating R&B influences and old-school hip-hop melodies when the story called for different moods, while ensuring that each major character had their own distinctive musical theme that could be woven into the larger compositional framework throughout the series. Fact 15. A cancelled Game Boy game was showcased at E3. One of the most tantalizing pieces of Static Shock merchandise that fans never got to experience was a fully developed video game that made it all the way to public demonstration at the industry's biggest trade show before mysteriously vanishing forever. In May of 2003, Midway Games announced that they were developing a platform-style video game based on the animated series specifically for Nintendo's Game Boy Advance handheld system, generating excitement among fans who were eager to control Static's electromagnetic powers in an interactive format. The game had progressed far enough in development that Midway felt confident bringing it to the Electronic Entertainment Expo, the video game industry's most important annual event, where companies showcase their upcoming releases to press, retailers, and industry professionals. The Static Shock game was actually displayed on the E3 show floor, meaning that attendees could play working versions of the game and experience firsthand how Static's electrical abilities would translate into gameplay mechanics on the portable gaming system. This public demonstration indicated that the game was in an advanced stage of development, with playable levels, functional character controls, and enough polish to represent the project in a professional setting where first impressions could make or break a product's commercial prospects. The fact that Midway was willing to invest in E3 booth space and dedicate resources to showing off the game suggests that they had significant confidence in the project and were actively promoting it as an upcoming release. However, despite this promising public debut and the apparent investment in bringing the game to a playable state, The Static Shock Game Boy Advance title was subsequently canceled without any official explanation from Midway Games or Warner Brothers about what led to the decision to abandon the project. The cancellation remains one of the more puzzling aspects of Static Shock's merchandising history, particularly given that the game had already overcome the significant hurdle of reaching the demonstration phase at a major industry event.